cutting off all corridors for food and water, and erasing Muslims. This corridor is a strategy to directly supply resources to the Arakan Army under the guise of humanitarian aid. Proxy battlefield may emerge in Rohingya camps and broader areas. First, military operations in disguise. That is, there is a risk of weapon smuggling or covert military actions being carried out through the corridor. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of Ekhoni Shomoi. Today we'll talk about the much discussed humanitarian corridor and how it might be a disaster for Bangladesh. If you haven't followed us already, make sure to drop a follow. The Rohingya crisis has recently gained a new dimension with the proposal of a so-called humanitarian corridor. This proposal came into discussion following a statement by the Foreign Affairs Advisor to the Bangladesh's interim government, who said that Bangladesh has, in principle, agreed to this initiative. According to the United Nations definition, a humanitarian corridor is a temporary ceasefire zone in a conflict area where a specific route or area is designated for delivering food, medicine, and emergency aid. It is conducted under the supervision of international organizations and with the consent of all parties involved in the conflict. This proposal is not entirely new. In March, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres visited Bangladesh, toured the Rohingya camps, and joined an iftar gathering. During that time, the interim government's chief advisor, Dr. Muhammad Yunus, described the Rohingya as guests and expressed hope that they would be able to celebrate next Eid in their homeland. During the BIMSTEC summit, Myanmar announced that it was willing to repatriate 180,000 Rohingya refugees. Guterres emphasized the necessity of establishing a humanitarian corridor to ensure aid delivery in Rakhine. Bangladesh agreed in principle, but clearly stated that such a decision would require the consent of both the Myanmar government and the Arakan Army. However, internally, this decision has sparked political controversy. BNP Secretary General Mirza Fakhrul Islam Alamgir criticized this move, stating that such a sensitive issue was decided without consulting political parties. He argued that this involves Bangladesh's independence, sovereignty, and regional stability. Several other heavyweight political leaders echoed his concerns. In response, Press Secretary Shafiqul Alam later clarified that no formal discussion had taken place between the government of Bangladesh and the UN or any other organization on the matter. However, if a UN-led initiative is undertaken to implement the corridor, Bangladesh is prepared to provide logistical support. So now the question is, where do things stand? Is Bangladesh prepared for a humanitarian corridor? We'll get to that, but first, let's take a look at the stakes of the US, China, and India on this issue. The issue of this Rakhine corridor is not merely humanitarian. It is deeply geopolitical. The interests of China, India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar intersect here. Also involved are the United Nations and the United States. China has already built the Chakpao deep sea port and oil gas pipelines in Rakhine, which are part of its Belt and Road Initiative. Access to the Indian Ocean through Rakhine is crucial for China. The escalating conflict has placed these investments at risk. In this context, the establishment of a humanitarian corridor is both politically and economically advantageous for China. India is anxious about the security of its northeastern region. It has the Kaladan project with Myanmar, connecting its Mizoram state to the Myanmar Sito port. India fears that the increased Chinese presence in Rakhine corridor could pose a security threat to its northeastern territories. So that's about China and India. But is the United States free of ulterior motives here? Not at all. We must remember that during the brutal genocide against the Rohingya Muslims, one of the key allies to Myanmar's military junta was the armed Buddhist group Arakan Army. This group is not just a rebel force. It operates as a proxy force of the international powers, particularly the United Nations, to extend its influence in the region for geopolitical interests. Today, when the Arakan Army itself is embroiled in civil war, the proposal for a humanitarian corridor under UN supervision, a body largely influenced by the US, has surfaced. Many believe that in reality, this corridor is a strategy to directly supply resources to the Arakan Army under the guise of humanitarian aid. In the past, we've seen how the Hasina government, which operates under the allegiance of India and Britain, allowed warships of the Myanmar junta to operate off the coast of St. Martin's and Teknaf. It even ceremonially sent back BGP and the military personnel who were directly involved in the Rohingya genocide with flowers. Now, the interim government seems to be following the same path, helping the Arakan Army, empowering the collaborators of genocide. In this situation, we must remember the US's so-called humanitarian concern for the Rohingya is not a neutral or altruistic effort. This is the same US that through Israel is killing children, women, and destroying hospitals in Gaza, cutting off all corridors for food and water, and erasing Muslims. Their crocodile tears for the Rohingyas are in reality part of a broader plan to seize strategic resources in the region and establish a new kind of colonial presence. So, how will Bangladesh maintain balance in all this? Or rather, whose interests will Bangladesh serve? Bangladesh is maintaining economic partnerships with China on one side, while considering India's security concerns on the other. At the same time, it is giving limited, conditional consent to the humanitarian corridor under pressure from the UN and Western donor groups. But this so-called strategic balancing could invite serious risks. Much of Rakhine is currently under Arakan Army's control, which has significantly weakened the Myanmar military's actual control over the area. Hence, implementing a corridor would require the consent of both the junta and the Arakan Army. Implementing such a corridor brings multiple risks. What are they? First, military operations in disguise. That is, there is a risk of weapon smuggling or covert military actions being carried out through the corridor. Second, infiltration by foreign intelligence agencies. In the name of international organizations, there is a concern of increased interference in broader areas. Third, increased regional tensions. Chinese involvement might alarm India, potentially escalating tensions in South Asia. Fourth, international security threats in Bangladesh. That is, a proxy battlefield may emerge in Rohingya camps and broader areas. To put it bluntly, while some may call the humanitarian corridor merely a channel for humanitarian aid, it actually harbors deep geopolitical interests, strategic calculations, and security concerns. For China, India, Myanmar, and Bangladesh, this corridor is a complex geopolitical chess move. The government of Bangladesh is assisting the international community in fulfilling its humanitarian responsibilities, while also taking a strategic stance to cope with pressure from regional powers and address security threats. However, the most important question still remains. Will this corridor ultimately ensure the safety and rights of the Rohingya Muslims, or will it become another excuse for the geopolitical conflicts?